Let's make this same day sourdough pizza crust.
So it's about 8 a.m. and I went ahead and fed my starter for the day. I took 45 grams out of my mother jar and added 45 grams of bread flour and 45 grams of water. And I'll let that rise and double in size over the rubber band over the next couple hours, probably until midday. Okay, so our starter has now risen and doubled in size. It's early afternoon, so we're gonna go ahead and assemble the dough. We're gonna start with 300 grams of water. Next we'll add 120-ish grams of our risen starter. Always make a little bit extra. And then with whatever's left, you can put it back in your mother jar. If you don't have a mother jar, you can just feed this and put it back in the fridge. Or you can just discard it, throw it away. Now we're gonna go ahead and mix this together. You can use whatever you want, a dough whisk, a spoon. I just use this spatula that I use to scoop the starter out of its jar because I like to have as few dishes as possible to wash at the end. All right, so now we'll go ahead and add our flour, which is gonna be 500 grams of flour. I just use all purpose. You can put whole wheat flour in it. Sometimes I will mix it up and put some whole wheat in it. And you can use some bread flour. I've never used all bread flour for this. I don't really know how that would behave, but I'm sure it would be fine. So 500 grams of flour. And then we're gonna add 10 to 12 grams of salt. And then I like to go ahead and add some seasoning in. I add garlic powder and Italian seasoning into the dough itself. That way it's in the crust. I put like a gram of each, maybe a little more. And then we're gonna combine all this until we get a nice shaggy dough. Now this is a very dry dough, so I would recommend going in with your hands and fully making sure everything is incorporated. I like to do that by folding the dough, pick it up and like fold it over itself. Just keep doing that until everything is fully incorporated. Now that everything is nice and incorporated, we're gonna go ahead and cover this up and let it rest on the counter for about an hour. And then we're only gonna do one stretch and fold. That's all we need. It's also very flexible. If you don't do the stretch and fold within an hour, it's totally fine. I've given it up to 2 hours, still tastes just as good. All right, so it's been about an hour and a half. Like I said, this recipe is very flexible. But now that it's been resting, I'm gonna go ahead and scrape down the sides. Not necessary, but it just gets everything, all the gunk off the side from earlier. So we're gonna scrape down the sides and do our one and only round of stretch and folds. Just make sure your hands are wet. Otherwise the dough will definitely be sticking to you. Once we get done with this stretch and fold, we're gonna cover it again and let it rest on the counter until you're ready to make it for dinner. For me, it's 4 o'clock right now, and I'll probably get started on dinner about 6:30 or 7. I let it proof for at least an hour and a half, sometimes 2, 3, even 4 hours. This pizza dough recipe is very flexible. It's gonna be great either way.
All right, so it's now a little after 7 p.m. and it's time to go ahead and assemble and bake our pizzas. You'll want to scrape it out of the bowl and go ahead and divide it into 2 somewhat equal portions. And with each one of these, you're gonna shape it up kind of like you would a loaf of sourdough bread. It doesn't have to be perfect at all, but I like to go ahead and stretch it out into a flat rectangle and then roll it up just like you would a sourdough boule. And then kind of push and roll it into a little ball. And then you're going to let that ball rest for a few minutes, kind of just like you would if you're making sourdough. Also, don't be afraid to use flour. I use a lot of flour when rolling out my pizza crusts. I also will kind of cheat a little bit and use a rolling pin to get my disc started, and then I will stretch it with my hands. This does take some practice, and I'm not quite where I can, spin it around like a like a fancy pizza chef, but I've got it pretty good. So you'll stretch it out and then put it on a 12-inch pizza pan. You might have to do some more stretching with it. Or if it's really springing back still, you can let it rest for a few more minutes and then keep stretching it. That'll help. While this is happening, make sure you have your oven preheating to 450 degrees. Then you will top and bake your pizzas for about 18 minutes. And that's really it. This pizza, I make it every single week. It is so good. I promise it's going to be the only pizza recipe you want to use.